Gavin, just a moment.
What the do you want?
Is it true that your Small Moments video was criticized for having a post-credits scene?
All right, you listen here and listen good, because I'm going to say this once and only once. You got that?
Okay.
My Small Moments video was absolutely beautiful, and that post-credit scene was perfect. That class is and that's a fact.
How is that a fact?
Excuse me?
Well, I mean, art is subjective and everything, so how can you prove that something has actual quality?
All right, I'll prove it. Let's make some rules to figure out how we can implement post-credit scenes into our own work. But if we're gonna make rules for how to do this, we first have to start at the beginning. Part 1, the history of the post-credit scene. Now you might be wondering, Gavin, how much history is there exactly for the post-credit scene? And that's a bit of a weird question to answer. The post-credit scene itself dates back to around the 60s, but if we look at the DNA of the post-credit scene, it can be traced all the way back to the 15th century. The earliest form of the post-credit scene actually comes from books, in the form of an epilogue. The epilogue takes place after the main story has ended. Its purpose is usually to resolve the fates of the characters and give a little addition to the story afterwards to show that everything has turned out okay. However, actually there are certain cases where it's made to create tension. This is usually used in horror books, where after they think that the monster has been defeated, turns out it's actually still roaming around, and it could come and get you too. It can also be there to set up sequels. An interesting trait of the epilogue is how it can be used to change up the style of storytelling that has been used throughout the entire book. Take And Then There Were None. Throughout the book, it's told from the point of view of different characters. However, the epilogue of the book is actually a letter that one of the characters wrote, which explains the whole mystery of the book. Continuing past books and moving on to the next form of the post-credit scene, also called the epilogue, but this time of a play. Someone in the play would break character and start talking directly to the audience. If it was a happier show, then the person would do exactly like what most epilogues do and explain, what happened to the characters after the main story had ended. However, for more darker shows, the epilogue would instead be there to show the moral of the story. After the epilogue comes the encore. Encores originally originated in operas around the 18th century. It's believed that the encore started due to the inaccessibility of listening to music back then. Because you couldn't just buy an album and listen to it on your own, you'd have to go and see live music performed in order to hear the songs you wanted to hear. But of course, the problem with that is that costs a lot of money to do, and a lot of people don't have that kind of money. So what would happen at these operas is after a piece ended, people would stand up and start clapping. But sometimes they'd clap for a really, really long time. The person conducting the opera would then obviously realize, oh wow, these people really seem to like the song, and then they'd perform the song again. The encore continued for a while, but it actually dropped off around the 1920s. The reason for this being is since operas are a storytelling medium, when you stop to redo a song that you've already sang, it interrupts the story and dissolves all the dramatic tension that the opera was creating. The encore would then resurface around the 60s. And speaking of the 60s, as I mentioned before, that's when we have our first example of the post-credit scene. The first popular example of a post-credit scene comes from the 1966 movie The Silencers. It's just some guy surrounded by women, I'm pretty sure. I don't know, I didn't really look it up because it didn't seem like it had that much of an impact at the time. No, the first truly impactful post-credit scene came from the 1979 Muppet movie. Now, in this movie, the post-credit scene is actually really interesting and unique. It's sort of this meta thing where it zooms out of the camera a little bit and it shows the Muppets are actually watching the movie, and they give some commentary on how they thought the movie would win, and at the very end, Animal actually turns to the audience and says, "Go home." Very meta stuff. This very much set the precedent for how most post-credit scenes go today. Other than the ones that are there to set up sequels, they're almost always comedic, and some of them also break the fourth wall like the Muppet movie did. And now today, it feels like you can go to almost any movie, whether it be comedic, serious, or a horror film, and there will almost always be some comedic stinger in the credits. So now that we've established the history of the post-credit scene, it's of course time for part 2, the rules of the post-credit scene. Just like any artistic medium, Rules are there to be broken. However, these 3 rules that I've made today pretty much will never be broken at the risk of it decreasing quality. Rule number 1, the medium is allowed to change. Just like in And Then There Were None, or even in the Muppet movie, Breaking the Fourth Wall, the medium is allowed to change in the post-credits scene. The feel of the film is allowed to change. However, while the style of the film is allowed to change, what should not change is rule number 2. You cannot change the tone. I believe they had it right in the 1920s, where they stopped doing encores because it interrupted the dramatic purpose of the show. Similarly, when a comedic post-credit scene is at the end of a more serious film, that kinda undermines the more serious aspects of the film that went before the comedic post-credit scene. The final and most important rule is rule number 3. The post-credit scene needs to impact the audience. Whether it's resolving tension of the story by showing that the characters are still okay, or creating tension by still showing the threat is still out there, or whether it's telling the moral of the story, or whether it's even just allowing people to hear music that they want because they can't buy it and listen to it on their own, the post-credit scene in all of its forms has always primarily been to serve the audience. This, of course, is the most difficult and hard rule to accomplish because it has a lot less set parameters than the other 2 rules that came before. Perhaps it would be good to maybe, I don't know, look at an example of a good form of a post-credit scene. That way we can sort of see it in action and, like take inspiration. Part 3, why my post-credit scene was absolutely peak. Now, before we get into the post-credit scene itself, this is just a little defending I'd like to do on my part. A lot of people gave me a lot of flack saying, oh my gosh, the black screen and silence was too long. Well, actually, if you use your ears, you can hear that once the music has completely faded out, there's only like 2 seconds of silence, which, if you ask me, isn't that long. Getting into the actual scene itself now, we first examine it with rule number 1. The artistic medium is allowed to change. And that's exactly what you see me doing in my film. No longer is there music or no ambient sound. Now we can very much hear what is happening, and the cuts are a lot less frequent because there aren't any. It's just one long shot. The camera work is also a lot more sloppy now, but that's because the post-credit scene is kind of going for a more homemade film kind of look. It's not supposed to look pretty, it's supposed to look honest. Now, rule number 2, does the post-credit scene break the tone of the film so far? No, it doesn't. I mean, there were tons of comedic moments throughout the entire portion of the film, from Grant tickling Carl, to Grant and Carl recording each other on their own phones, to Grant harassing Carl during ping pong, to Grant harassing Carl during pool. The entire thing has had comedic undertones up to this point. Granted, there were serious moments too, showing the memories of Carl and Grant in the past, and, the fact and reality is that soon that they won't be able to make those memories anymore, but still, those more serious tones were in service of the comedic bits because it enriches them and it gives them more meaning. So far, this post-credit scene has completely passed the test. But now we move on to the most important rule number 3, which is also the hardest one to get right. Now, if you recall, or if you were there, you may remember that with one notable exception, everyone seemed to really enjoy my post-credit scene. However, that really doesn't matter. The target audience for this film was not, and was never meant to be, the video productions class. It was Grant and Carl. Specifically, I had in mind while making this film, Grant and Carl in a time where they could no longer see each other every day because they weren't living in the same house anymore. I wanted this film to serve as a reminder of those memories and those times together, even long after they were over. That was and was always the purpose of this film. So has this post-credit scene passed the test? That remains to be seen. However, the important thing is that we learned how to use post-credit scenes in our own work. We examined the history of them, we learned the rules for them, and then we also used an example to show how this can be used to contribute to the tone of a film. In the end, I hope you understand now why there's a difference between Grant putting a bunch of disses at Cameron at the end of his interview for Carl, two completely separate people that have nothing to do with each other, and why using Grant and Carl playing with each other has a lot more artistic meaning and purpose behind it, and really should not even be in the same conversation, except to compare and contrast them, saying mine is completely better than Grant's, and Grant's was completely garbage. Thank you for watching.
We're going